In a tense courtroom, an arrogant judge humiliates a teenage black boy standing alone at the defendant's table. The boy's silence hides something powerful. When he rips his ID and drops one shocking line, the whole room freezes, and the judge senses he just made the worst mistake of his career. You people never learn where you don't belong. Crawl back to your streets before I bury you in prison time. Judge Hawthorne's voice cracked through the silent courtroom like a whip. The air was stale, heavy with dust and whispers that dared not turn into words. A ceiling fan turned lazily above his high bench, barely stirring the heat that clung. To every wooden pew, rows of eyes clung to the young black boy standing alone. No lawyer beside him, no briefcase. Just an old white shirt tucked into faded jeans, sneakers so worn they looked ready to fall apart on the cold marble floor dot behind. The boy, the court clerk, pretended to shuffle papers but kept stealing glances at the judge's sneer. A bailiff leaned against the wall, one hand resting near the grip of his taser, just in case the boy did something unexpected. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward, elbows digging into the polished oak. His gavel rested inches from his fingers. A weapon masquerading as wood. He enjoyed these moments. Moments where power wasn't debated. It was demonstrated. "I asked you a question, boy," Hawthorne drawled, voice dripping with disdain. "Do you plead guilty or not guilty? Or do you not understand your options?" The boy didn't flinch, didn't fidget. His hands were loose at his sides. His eyes, dark, steady, locked on Hawthorne like he was looking through him, beyond. Him. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter's pen scratched nervously against paper. Two interns leaned forward, wide-eyed. They had come for a routine arraignment, but this was something else. Hawthorne clicked his tongue. "Mute, are we? Or just slow? Speak up, boy, or I'll speak for you." A bead of sweat rolled down the boy's temple. He blinked, then slowly reached into his pocket. The bailiff's boots squeaked as he shifted, hand tightening on the taser's holster. A hush spread like a chill. The boy's fingers emerged holding a battered plastic ID card, edges cracked, lamination peeling. He held it up between thumb and forefinger, turning it under the flickering court lights for everyone to see. Hawthorne scoffed, a dry laugh. That made the clerk wince. "Oh, how touching, a fake ID. You think that impresses me? This isn't your street corner, boy. This is my court." Without a word, the boy's thumb pressed against the card's center. He bent it once, twice, then tore it clean down the middle. The halves fluttered to the floor like broken wings. Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff took half a step forward, then froze as the boy's voice finally cut through the stale air. Quiet, clear, and cold enough to silence every throat. "You shouldn't mock people whose name you haven't learned, Your Honor." Hawthorne's smirk faltered, just a flicker. The boy's eyes narrowed, a quiet fire flickering behind calm lids. "You want a plea?" The boy said, voice a notch louder. "Check your real docket. I'm not the one on trial today." The bailiff's boots scuffed backwards. The clerk's fingers hovered over the keyboard, breath caught mid-gasp. A reporter snapped a photo that would later go viral, the judge's face, stuck between arrogance and the first creeping fear of being outplayed. The boy lowered his torn ID pieces onto the defense table, like laying down dead evidence. Then, with a voice so calm it chilled the blood in every onlooker's veins, he added, "Next time you swing your gavel, make sure it doesn't swing back." Hawthorne's knuckles whitened around the gavel's handle. The slam that followed cracked like thunder, but it couldn't drown the one truth now crackling in every corner of that courtroom. He was not who they thought he was. And Judge Hawthorne was about to find out too late. The heavy oak doors thudded shut behind him, sealing the stale courtroom air inside. The corridor outside smelled of overwaxed, floors and burnt coffee from a vending machine that hadn't worked in years. The teenager paused under the flickering ceiling lights, eyes adjusting from the harsh glare of the courtroom to the softer dusk of the hallway. For a moment, he stood still, just a kid in cheap sneakers and a fraying shirt. But now the echo of that last line crackled behind him like a fuse waiting for flame. A cough, a hurried footstep. Then the vultures descended. "Hey, kid." "What? Did you mean back there? Who are you really? Did you just threaten a sitting judge?" Reporters and clerks swarmed him like insects around a bare bulb. Their notepads scraped against each other, microphone tips bobbed like hungry beaks. A courtroom intern, hair tied in a too-tight bun, peeked over their shoulders. Phone camera already recording. He didn't flinch. His hands slipped into his pockets, fingertips brushing something thin and folded. The sealed letter his mentor had handed him in a forgotten corner of the hallway before the storm began. He knew the real courtroom wouldn't be behind those doors. It would be out here. In the rumors, the clicks, the whispers that would carry his truth further than any gavel could reach. One reporter, older than the rest, leaned in closer, a deep frown etched into her forehead. She smelled of cheap perfume and ink. "Is this a prank? A stunt? Are you some influencer looking for views?" He lifted his gaze, calm and even, to meet hers. The corridor seemed to hush for a moment, like the air itself leaned closer to hear. "Is it a prank?" he repeated softly, tasting the words. Then a smile small practiced, cutting. "Not for me." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Someone clicked a pen open, then closed. A security guard hovered near the metal detector, pretending not to watch too closely. Then a voice called out, low, gravelly, echoing off the marble walls. "Make some space, people. You're blocking the exits." The teenager's eyes flicked sideways. There he was, the old man in the rumpled charcoal suit. Same weathered face, same silver watch peeking from a frayed cuff. His mentor. Or what the world would call the ghost behind the curtain. The reporters turned, sniffing for new meat. The old man raised a palm, polite but firm. "This young man has a right to fresh air and fair trial. If you have questions, direct them to the court records. They'll tell you everything in due time." A young journalist piped up, "And who exactly are you, sir?" The old man's eyes crinkled in a tired smile. "I'm no one important. Just a librarian. He's the story." A chuckle escaped the boy's lips, the kind that made the pushy crowd freeze for half a second. He stepped closer to his mentor, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "Librarian? That's the cover story now?" The old man shrugged, eyes twinkling behind thin glasses. "Sometimes the truth needs to wear plain clothes." A microphone hovered an inch from the boy's chin. He ignored it, turning to the vending machine humming at the end of the hall. His reflection stared back at him in the smudged glass. Dark eyes steady, collar askew, hair curling at the ends. A teenage nobody. A hidden storm dot behind him, the courtroom doors cracked open again, just enough for a flash of black robes and silver hair. Judge Hawthorne's voice slipped through, muffled but poisoned. "Find him. Find out who he thinks he is." The boys. Smile barely moved, but the old man saw it. The mentor dipped his head in a nod only they understood. The plan was alive, and the trap had its first bait. A guard called out from the far end, waving them along. Court business waited. The next step. The next mask to slip off. The boy turned back to the old man, voice almost a whisper. "When do we open it?" The old man tapped the breast pocket where the envelope rested. "When the gavel drops on you again, not a second sooner." A camera flashed. A headline was born, and the corridor swallowed them back into its endless hum. Judge Hawthorne's chambers were colder than the courtroom, thick carpet, shelves of dusty leather tomes, and an old oil painting of his father glaring down from the wood-paneled wall. The heavy gavel that had slammed so confidently moments ago now lay still on his polished desk, the judge's hand twitching near it like a man tempted to crush a fly that wouldn't die. His clerk, a thin man with 2 large glasses, shuffled nervously through a stack of papers balanced on a manila folder. Sweat beaded along his hairline, soaking into his starched collar. Hawthorne's voice lashed across the small room. "What do you mean you can't find him in the system? He's standing in my court, mocking me, and you're telling me you don't know who he is?" The clerk's fingers fumbled across keys as he flipped open his laptop again. The screen's glow throwing harsh light on his pale face. "Your Honor, I ran every variation of his name, what was on the torn ID, the booking sheet, even the PFAN. Security sign-in. The system just redirects to a sealed juvenile file. No date, no charges, no parent contact." Hawthorne snatched the folder from the desk and flipped through it. Blank sheets. A single red stamp glared up at him. "Confidential by order of the State Bar." He shoved the papers back. "This is a courthouse, not a carnival. I want the full report on my desk by morning. I don't care if you have to wake every clerk in this city. I want to know who that boy belongs to." The clerk cleared his throat, voice tiny under the judge's thunder. "Sir, if I may, we could, call in internal affairs. They might." Hawthorne slammed his palm flat on the table. The gavel rattled, rolling an inch before settling back into place. "No one calls Ia on me. Not for a street kid with an attitude." Outside the chamber's door, muffled voices carried through the thick wood. The courthouse's heartbeat, lawyers shuffling files, bailiffs radioing back. The boy didn't look up. The coin flipped, caught, flipped again. They were enemies long before I walked in. She glanced over her shoulder. No cameras here. No curious interns. Just the cold hum of a locked hallway and a boy who was no boy at all. "You ready for this?" she asked, her tone equal parts warning and worry. He finally looked at her, steady, unwavering. "I didn't come here to lose." She reached into her purse and pulled out a slim flash drive, pressing it into his palm. "If the judge pushes too far, this file will be your shield. Or your sword." The boy slipped it into his pocket with the sealed envelope. 2 truths, 1 bullet. Both aimed at the same man in the same black robe. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "They're not ready for you. Keep your dignity sharp. He'll be sloppy. Arrogance always is." The coin rolled over his fingers one last time before he slipped it into the machine. A cheap soda rattled out with a clunk. He cracked it open, the hiss echoing through the silent hallway. "He wants me back in the morning," the boy said, almost amused. She smirked, stepping backward. "Then give him a sunrise he'll never forget." The courthouse doors swung wide at precisely 9 o'clock. The morning sun spilled across the cold marble floor, catching dust motes dancing like secrets in the air. Inside courtroom 3B, the benches were filled to bursting, lawyers clutching thick files, junior reporters leaning over cheap recording gear, bored bailiffs trying to look busy. All eyes flicked to the door as the teenager walked in, alone, hands tucked into his pockets like he was strolling through a library instead of a legal battlefield. Judge Hawthorne watched him from the bench, lips pressed thin, one hand drumming the gavel handle. His robe looked heavier today, like it was stitched with fresh anger and yesterday's bruised pride. The boy stepped to the defense table, still no lawyer beside him. Just him and the silent roar of 100 hushed conversations. The bailiff's voice cracked through the tension. All rise for the Honorable Judge Hawthorne. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. Silence, thick and uneasy. Hawthorne cleared his throat, eyes locked on the boy's calm face. He wanted to see fear there, or at least an apology trembling at the edge of his lips. But there was only that same unsettling quiet. Before we proceed, Hawthorne announced, voice echoing off the marble walls, this court recognizes that the defendant has shown blatant disrespect to the authority of this bench. A rustle of murmurs. The teenager tilted his head slightly, watching. Waiting. The judge leaned forward, gavel inches from a slam. Therefore, I hereby find you in contempt of court. You will spend the next 30 days in county lockup until you learn how to behave. In front of this institution. A gasp rippled through the benches. A young reporter scribbled furiously, the scratch of pen louder than the murmurs. The boy didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket. The room tensed, half the bailiffs shifting a step closer, and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper, crisp and white against his dark skin. He held it up with 2 fingers, letting the overhead lights catch. The seal embossed at the bottom. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. Before you bang that gavel, you might want to read this. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. What is it? A stay order, the boy replied, calm as rain. Signed by a circuit judge above your rank. A stunned hush. The bailiff stepped forward, took the sheet, and carried it to the bench with hesitant hands. Hawthorne snatched it, eyes scanning the signature at the bottom. Judge Olivia Rawlins, 3rd District Appeals. Lines of disbelief carved into his forehead. How did you? This is a federal override. The boy tucked his hands back into his pockets. No, sir. It's a reminder that your gavel only swings so far. A chuckle rose in the gallery, quick, strangled, as someone tried to hide it behind a cough. Hawthorne slammed the gavel, but the sound didn't land the way it had yesterday. It felt hollow. Who's representing you? Hawthorne snapped. Who filed this on your behalf? The boy's gaze never wavered. I did. The clerk, peering over the judge's shoulder, whispered, Sir, the seal's real. The docket shows a sealed motion filed late last night. He used the emergency clerk window. The authorization checks out. A bead of sweat trickled down Hawthorne's temple. For a moment, he almost looked smaller in that giant chair. A man who'd built walls so high, he'd forgotten they could crack. Remove the contempt order, the boy said softly, not pleading. Commanding. Or the next motion I file will have you explaining to the ethics board why you tried to silence a registered member of the state bar. The judge flinched like he'd been slapped. A reporter's camera clicked. Another pen scratched. The entire room seemed to lean forward, hungry for the next blow. Hawthorne forced his voice steady. Fine. Contempt order vacated. For now. Grin tugged at the corners of the boy's mouth. Not smug, just certain. He turned slightly, letting the entire gallery see his face. A face that was no longer just a kid's. He slipped the folded paper back into his pocket as if tucking away. A blade. Then he spoke loud enough for every journalist, lawyer, and silent spectator to hear, Thank you, Your Honor. Now shall we talk about the real charges? Hawthorne's gavel trembled on the desk. The courtroom walls seemed to shrink closer, pressing in around him. And for the first time in Judge Hawthorne's long reign, he realized that the power he thought he owned was slipping through his fingers. one calm word at a time. Judge Hawthorne's private office had never felt so small. The carved bookshelves, once trophies of his authority, now loomed like silent witnesses to a truth he didn't want to face. A half-finished cup of coffee sat cold on his desk, the ring it left on the polished wood darker than the stain itself. He stood behind his chair, staring at the sealed file on his desk. The same file that refused to open. The same file the clerk had sworn was locked under a state seal no judge, not even him, could override without setting off alarms. Who was this boy? What game was he playing? Who gave him the nerve to stand alone in open court and stare down a robe that had buried dozens like him? Hawthorne's hands trembled as he turned to the window. Below, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters and onlookers. He could see them peering up, hoping for a glimpse, or better yet, a fall. He ran a hand through his thin silver hair. His father's portrait watched from behind the desk, eyes stern, lips curled in that same disappointed grimace Hawthorne had grown up beneath. The old man's voice echoed in his head. Control the room, or the room controls you. But the room wasn't listening anymore, was it? A knock startled him. His clerk stepped in, eyes downcast. Sir, they're waiting for you in the conference room. The Bar Association rep is here, about the boy. Hawthorne's pulse thudded in his ears. The man, he corrected, voice brittle. Stop calling him a boy. The clerk nodded, disappearing like a ghost. Hawthorne's eyes fell back to the file, that infuriating sealed file stamped in crisp black letters. Authorized access only state bar jurisdiction. He grabbed the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. He needed to find a crack. Any crack. Before the next gavel drop turned him from judge to defendant. 2 floors down, the teenager sat on a low marble bench outside an old law library tucked behind the main hall. His knees bounced in a rhythm only he understood, not nervousness, but calculation. Beside him, the same sharp-eyed woman from the corridor leaned forward, her voice low and tight. It's working. The bar rep just walked into his office. He's rattled. He sipped from a plastic water bottle, the cap rolling on the bench beside him like a chess piece waiting to be played. He should be rattled, he said quietly. He's been hiding behind that robe for 20 years. He forgot that law is bigger than any robe. She studied him, the loose shirt, the frayed backpack, the scuffed shoes. So easy for people to dismiss him. So dangerous for those who did. You know they'll dig, she warned. They'll poke every part of your story, your file, your grades, your clerkship. He smiled, faint but sure. Let them. Everything checks out. Every signature, every form, every late-night exam they said I was too young to sit for. She reached into her folder, pulling out a single manila envelope, thick, sealed with red tape. And the last piece? He tapped the front of his shirt pocket. Safe. I won't open it until he tries to swing again. A bailiff passed by, pausing when he saw the pair. The boy nodded politely, just another polite kid waiting his turn. The bailiff moved on, footsteps echoing down the long hall. The woman leaned closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. And after? If he doesn't fold? The boy's eyes flicked to the law library doors, the old wood, the brass handles polished by decades of hands searching for truth. He drew a slow breath. Then we give them what they really want, he murmured. A public record, a courtroom full of cameras. A precedent no one can bury. She studied him, searching for a crack in his calm, but there was none. Just a teenager, with a lion's heartbeat hidden under thrift store fabric. Aha. Single text buzzed on her phone. He's calling you in. She closed the folder, slipping it back into her bag. "It's your move now. You sure you want the door open this wide?" He capped his water bottle, the click loud in the quiet hall. "Wide enough for sunlight. That's all I need." She rose, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "Then, let's burn it clean." He stayed seated a moment longer, staring at the brass plaque above the library doors. Knowledge, ice power. An old motto carved when the building was young and still true enough to build revolutions on. He stood, shouldering his worn backpack. Somewhere up above, Judge Hawthorne was pacing in a room lined with shadows. Down here, the boy was nothing but a shape moving silently through stone hallways, but the storm he carried was louder than any gavel ever cast. The small conference room smelled of stale coffee and polished wood. A brass nameplate on the oak door still read Judicial Ethics Board Conference. Sweet, a name that sounded more intimidating than the flickering ceiling light that buzzed above the oval table. Judge Hawthorne sat at the head of that table, his fingers drumming a restless beat next to a thick leather binder. His robe hung over the back of his chair, replaced by a crisp white shirt now wrinkled at the collar. Sweat glistened at his temples despite the humming air conditioner. Across from him, 3 officials from the state bar sat shoulder to shoulder, suits dark, expressions darker. One of them, a silver-haired woman with sharp glasses and a voice that could cut glass, spoke first. "Your Honor, the board received an unusual midnight filing under your docket number, yet flagged with a state seal. We'd like to clarify exactly what's happening in your courtroom today." Hawthorne's jaw clenched. "I'm handling a routine matter." A youth overstepping, pretending to be, the woman raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Pretending or qualifying, there's a difference. A faint knock on the door. A junior clerk pushed it open, eyes flicking nervously from Hawthorne to the officials. "Sir, he's here." The young man. Silence swallowed the room. For a heartbeat, the bar officials traded looks. Hawthorne pressed his palm flat against the binder like he could steady the ground under his feet. "Send him in," the silver-haired woman ordered. A moment later, the teenager stepped in. Same plain shirt, same frayed backpack slung over one shoulder. But this time, his gaze was sharper, older than any courtroom outside those walls could hold. He paused at the threshold, eyes sweeping the circle of eyes waiting to dissect him. He felt the weight of 1,000 unasked questions hanging in the stale air like storm clouds. Hawthorne's voice cracked first. "Sit." The boy didn't move. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a slim folder bound in red tape. He laid it on the table in front of him, still standing. The silver-haired woman gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, we're not here to trick you. We're here to understand you." Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair. The backpack stayed slung across his shoulder like a soldier's shield. One of the officials leaned forward. "State your name for the record." The boy's voice was clear, calm, the same voice that had silenced a courtroom the day before. "Michael K. Daniels, registered junior bar associate, clerkship under Judge Olivia Rollins, 3rd District Appeals." Hawthorne's breath caught. A single bead of sweat traced his temple, slipping under his collar. The woman flipped through a slim laptop, the screen casting a cold glow on her glasses. "Your credentials check out. You passed the bar at 16. Sealed under special provision. To protect your identity due to threats. That's a rare clause." Michael met her eyes. "Not rare when the threats come from powerful places." A thin smile tugged at her mouth. "Fair point. Now explain the contempt motion yesterday." Michael's hands rested lightly on the folder's edge. "It wasn't contempt. It was a test. A test to see if the man wearing that robe would swing. It to silence or to serve the law." A hush. The hum of the ceiling light grew louder. Hawthorne's fingers twitched near the binder, but he said nothing. Michael leaned forward, his voice still soft but edged with iron. Your Honor's docket has cases stretching back 20 years, thousands of rulings, most clean, but some buried under sealed settlements that never saw the light of an appeal. This folder, he tapped it once, holds copies of 3. The silver-haired woman's eyes sharpened. And you obtained these how? Michael's smile was quiet, unsettling, legally. Through channels your office signed off on, back when you thought no one would ever use them. Hawthorne found his voice hoarse. This is blackmail. Michael shook his head. This is accountability. He cracked the folder open just enough for the bar officials to glimpse the top page, a judge's signature, a settlement amount, a victim's name redacted but visible enough for them to know it was real. He didn't push it across the table. Yet, just let it rest there, a silent bomb waiting for someone to cut the wire or light the fuse. The silver-haired woman sat back in her chair, folding her hands neatly. Young man, do you wish to file an ethics grievance today? Michael's eyes flicked to Hawthorne, then back. Not yet. But if he swings that gavel to bury the truth again, I will. Hawthorne's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. 4. The first time since the day began, the robe that wasn't on his shoulders felt heavier than steel dot in that cramped room of wood and shadows. One truth settled like dust on polished oak. The boy wasn't here to fight a case. He was here to finish. 1. The heavy conference room door closed behind Michael with a dull click that echoed down the marble hallway. He stood for a moment, letting his heart beat slow while muffled voices argued on the other side of the wall. Voices that once spoke with unchallenged authority, now tangled in whispers and unease. The corridor beyond felt colder than before. The sun slanted through tall windows, striking dust motes into gold flecks that danced around him like sparks from a match. To any passing clerk or intern, he looked like any other kid waiting for a guardian to pick him up. But inside, the courtroom's hush now lived in him like thunder waiting to strike. A low voice broke his focus. How deep did you push him? Michael turned. His mentor stood half in shadow near an old cork bulletin board cluttered with outdated notices. The old man's suit looked more rumpled than ever, as if he'd slept standing up. His eyes, though, sharp as broken glass. Deep enough, Michael said. They know. He knows. The old man's lips twitched at the corner, neither smile nor frown. Good, but you're not done, Michael's brow furrowed. I showed them the settlements, the hush money, the abuse of power. What else is there? The old man stepped closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The settlements. Our paper cuts. They bleed his reputation, but they won't bury him yet. Not unless you break the one rule every man like him hides behind. Michael's eyes narrowed. Which is? The old man slipped a small, battered notebook from inside. His coat. Its cover was cracked leather, the corners soft from decades of passing between hidden pockets and shaking hands. He pressed it into Michael's palm like a sacred object. This is his ledger, the favors he called in, the rulings he twisted, the names who paid him under the table. Michael turned the book over slowly. How do I know this is real? The old man's smile this time was cold, a flicker of steel behind tired eyes. Because I wrote half of it for him, back when I thought we were building an empire of power, not a graveyard for truth. Michael flipped it open, seeing scrawled. Dates, initials, crossed out lines, hidden codes. Each scribble was a nail for the coffin. Why now? Michael asked, voice low. Why give this up now? The old man's eyes found the windows where sunlight and shadow fought for space on polished stone. Because power used wrong doesn't just poison those who take it. It poisons everyone who stands by and says nothing. And I've said nothing too long. Footsteps echoed around the far corner. clerks shuffling papers, an intern balancing 2 cups of coffee, a bailiff scanning faces for trouble. All of them glanced at Michael as they passed, the rumor already alive in there. Sidelong stairs, Michael slid the ledger into his backpack. He'll try to silence me when this surfaces. The old man nodded. Let him try. That's the final trap. Once he swings at you with both hands, everyone will see him for what he is. Michael's jaw tightened, steady but heavy with the weight of it all. You think he'll crack? The old man's laugh was dry, brittle like autumn leaves. I know he will. Arrogance has a funny way of rotting from the inside out. He'll bury himself if you just give him the right shovel. A hush fell as a young reporter rounded the corner, notebook in hand, eyes wide when he spotted Michael. He froze mid-step as if seeing a ghost in daylight. Is it true? The reporter blurted. Did you really stand up to him? Are you really? A lawyer? Michael's eyes met his, tired but unflinching. Write what you see, he said, not just what they tell you. The reporter scribbled a frantic note, half listening, half trying to capture a headline that hadn't finished. Writing itself yet, Michael turned back to his mentor. What happens next? The old man stepped back, melting into the shadows near the bulletin board. Next, you stand where he can see you. Let him swing, and then you stand taller. Michael adjusted the backpack strap on his shoulder, the weight of the ledger grounding him in a place no fear could reach. The courthouse's old brass clock chimed noon, a single echo that rippled through the high halls. Somewhere behind him, the conference room door opened again, and low voices spilled out like an old secret gasping for air. Michael walked away from the door, not in retreat, but in quiet victory. Step by step, he moved through the maze of marble and whispers, each stride rewriting the story that began when a judge mocked a kid who should have stayed silent. But silence, he knew now, was the robe's last illusion, and he had come to tear it off, word by word, lie by lie. Echoes of polished shoes and hurried whispers filled courtroom 3B long before the judge's gavel did. Every bench was packed, lawyers in dark suits murmuring behind files, local reporters leaning over the railing, junior clerks clutching notebooks with shaky fingers at the defense table. Michael sat alone. But this time, alone didn't feel empty. It felt like a calm eye in a storm of secrets and watching eyes. Near the back row, his mentor leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The old man looked like a worn statue half hidden by shadows, present but content to let the storm rage around him. Judge Hawthorne swept in through the side door, robe draped over one shoulder as if he'd had to throw it on in a hurry. His eyes flicked across the crowd and landed on Michael with a hatred so quiet it burned hotter than any shout could. The bailiff's call jolted the room to its feet. The hush that followed carried a different weight now, a collective breath. Waiting for the next fracture, Hawthorne rapped the gavel once. Be seated, wood creaked as the gallery obeyed. Cameras clicked. Somewhere near the wall, a reporter whispered, "That's him." "That's the kid." Michael's gaze didn't leave Hawthorne's face. Calm, steady. The judge cleared his throat, voice strained but sharp. "Mr. Daniels, you stand before this court charged with obstruction, forgery, and impersonation of a licensed attorney." Murmurs erupted like a swarm of startled bees. Michael didn't move. Hawthorne raised his hand to hush the noise, but the sound wouldn't die easily now. "Do you have anything to say for yourself before this court decides your immediate detention?" The judge snapped. Michael's hands moved slowly, not in panic, but with the same careful precision of a surgeon about to cut. He unzipped his backpack, drew out the battered leather ledger, and laid it flat on the defense table like a sacred text. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He simply flipped the cover open. "This is what I have to say, Your Honor." Gasps shivered through the benches. The nearest reporter stepped forward so fast his pen dropped to the floor. The bailiff glanced at the clerk, eyes wide. Hawthorne's lips pulled tight. "What is that? More stunts?" Michael spoke softly, but each word struck the marble walls harder than a gavel ever could. "This," he said, tapping the yellowed pages, "is your record. Every favor traded for silence. Every ruling sold behind closed doors. Names, dates, signatures. The reason my file was sealed. The reason you tried to bury me before the sun came up." Hawthorne's fist curled around the gavel so tight his knuckles whitened. "This is slander." Michael's eyes flicked to the gallery, scanning each face, reporters scribbling, phones recording. The old man in the shadows giving the smallest nod. He stood, calm, centered, a storm in thrift store. "Close. Your Honor, I request this ledger be entered into evidence under Emergency Motion 416, Public Disclosure." Hawthorne barked a laugh that cracked under its own weight. "Denied. Absolutely not." A young woman's voice cut in from the back. The silver-haired bar official stepped forward, a paper in her hand. "With respect, Your Honor, the Board of Judicial Conduct has reviewed this document. Under state code, the motion must be heard if the evidence is credible." Hawthorne's glare shifted to her, a man cornered in his own den. "This is my courtroom. I decide," but Michael stepped forward, voice low enough for silence to lean in. "You mocked me. You called me a boy who didn't belong. You used this room to bury people who couldn't fight back. Now it's your turn to stand in the light you loved so much." The ledger lay open between them, inked names staring up like ghosts unwilling to stay buried. Hawthorne's gavel slammed down. Once, twice. The echo cracked the hush, but couldn't silence it. "I'll have you removed," he roared. Michael's hands stayed at his sides, unmoved, unafraid. "You can remove me," he said, every syllable like steel sliding into place. "But you can't unwrite what's in there, or the copies already delivered to the State Bar, the press, the Ethics Board." Murmurs turned into a hum, the sound of a dam breaking. Hawthorne's robe seemed too big for him now. His eyes darted to the bailiff, then to the door, then to the watching sea of eyes that no gavel could scatter any more. Michael's calm cut through the storm. "One last time. This courtroom doesn't belong to you," he said. "It belongs to the law, and the law is bigger than you." No roar, no applause. Just a quiet truth that pressed Hawthorne deeper into the black leather of his high-backed chair, a king in exile in his own castle. Somewhere behind Michael, his mentor closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting an old sin wash away in the light of a new truth. Outside, the sun rose higher, spilling through stained glass like a promise kept, and the boy who wasn't just a boy stood taller than any robe could ever hope to reach. The sound of hurried footsteps, whispered arguments, and the sharp click of camera shutters turned courtroom 3B into something more than a courtroom. It was now a living confession box, and every pair of eyes was a silent witness. Michael stood at the defense table, the battered ledger lying open like a wound that refused to close. His breath was steady despite the roar that built around him, reporters texting furiously, junior clerks whispering to each other about sealed files and hush money. Judge Hawthorne sat frozen behind the bench. His gavel rested beneath his trembling palm, a wooden relic that suddenly felt lighter than the truth pressing down on him. A bailiff approached the bench, eyes flicking nervously from Michael to the judge. He whispered something that made Hawthorne's jaw twitch, a private message that made him shift in his seat like he'd just been reminded he wasn't untouchable anymore. The silver-haired bar official stepped forward, folder in hand, voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through cloth. Your Honor, the board has received the digital copies of this ledger. Under Judicial Conduct Statute 14C, you are required to step aside until an ethics review is complete. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, not loud, but sharp like glass cracking underfoot. Hawthorne's voice scraped the silence. This is my court. I built this room, this bench. Michael's voice cut him off, calm and merciless. No, Your Honor. The people built this room. The law built this bench. You only borrowed them. The old man in the back row, Michael's mentor, smiled faintly, a tired, weathered smile that tasted of regret and relief all at once. Hawthorne lurched forward, hand wrapping around the gavel like a drowning man clutching driftwood. His eyes darted around the room, from the press to the bailiff to the bar officials who no longer wore polite masks. Bailiff. Remove him. Remove all of them. The bailiff didn't move. He looked at Michael, then at the silver-haired official, then back at Hawthorne, and took a single step backward, hands folded behind his back. Hawthorne's voice cracked. This is contempt. Do you know who I am? Michael stepped closer to the bench, ledger in hand. Yes, sir, he said softly, but the entire room heard it. You're a man who forgot that the gavel only echoes what's true. And your truth has run out. Click. Another camera. Click. Another phone recording. In this digital age, power didn't need robes or gavels. It needed witnesses, and the room had more than enough. The silver-haired woman opened her folder and read aloud, her voice clear as bells. By provisional authority of the State Judicial Board, we hereby suspend Judge Richard Hawthorne from the bench, effective immediately pending investigation. Court is adjourned under interim authority. The words fell like hammers on stone. Hawthorne's gavel lifted, shakily, then slammed down with all the force of a desperate man trying to command a kingdom already lost. Get him out, he rasped, voice breaking like an old hinge. Get him out of my court. The bailiff didn't move. Michael met the judge's panicked eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mock him the way Hawthorne had mocked him days ago. He simply spoke the truth that finished what the ledger had started. I'm not leaving. Your Honor, he said, steady as stone, you are. The courtroom held its breath as two board marshals stepped forward, plain suits, sharp eyes, authority heavier than any robe. They flanked Hawthorne's bench like shadows given shape. The old judge tried to stand, but his knees buckled, the robe slipping off his shoulders. He caught it with one trembling hand, clutching the black cloth to his chest like it could still hide him from the light that had finally found him. As the marshals led him away, reporters rushed forward, flashes bursting like fireworks at midnight. Every shutter click, every pen stroke, every whispered headline turned Hawthorne's last walk down his own aisle into an unmarked grave for the power he'd worshipped all his life. Michael watched him go, no triumph in his eyes, only a quiet, tired resolve. When the doors swung shut behind the fallen judge, the room breathed again. The silver-haired official stepped to Michael's side, voice softer now. You did it. Do you understand that? Michael didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the empty bench where Hawthorne had ruled for decades. I didn't do it, he said quietly. The truth did. Somewhere near the back, his mentor wiped his glasses with an old handkerchief, eyes bright behind decades of regret. One last camera shuddered as the silence settled back over the marble, the truth echoing louder than any verdict read before. And when Michael finally turned to leave the courtroom, ledger tucked under his arm, he carried no robe, no gavel, no permission. Only the power that comes when the truth finally stands taller than the lie that mocked it. The courthouse doors swung open one last time. The marble steps outside glowed in the late afternoon sun, golden light spilling over the gray stone like a promise. Michael stepped through them, alone but never alone again. Behind him, the old wood and brass held the echoes of a gavel that could no longer command silence. Ahead, the city hummed with car horns, footsteps, and the distant buzz of reporters shouting his name. He paused at the top step. His shoes, cheap canvas worn thin at the soles, felt heavier than ever, but the weight wasn't fear anymore. It was something older, stronger. A swarm of cameras clicked alive. Reporters leaned in, microphones jostling for a taste of the next quote, the next headline. Michael. Michael, are you really an attorney? How did you get the files? What happens to Judge Hawthorne now? Do you plan to sue the court? The questions piled up like bricks around him. But Michael didn't flinch. He just looked. Past the cameras, his eyes finding the people beyond, the young faces on the edge of the crowd, the clerks still clutching their notebooks, the janitor peering through the glass doors with a mop forgotten in his hand. A reporter shoved a mic. Closer. Michael, do you have anything to say to young people watching this? Kids like you? For a heartbeat, the marble steps were silent. Michael's fingers brushed the spine of the old ledger tucked in his bag. Now just paper, now just proof. That truth can survive even the darkest corridors. He leaned toward the mic. His voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just real. Yeah, he said. I want them to know the robe doesn't make the law. The gavel doesn't own the truth. And no door stays shut forever if you're willing to push. The crowd shifted, a hush rolling through the cluster of cameras. Even the reporter lowered her mic, blinking behind thick glasses. Michael glanced over his shoulder. The courthouse doors stood open behind him, a courtroom that had once buried stories now forced to stand naked in the sun. For the first time, it looked small, breakable. A soft shuffle of footsteps broke the moment. His mentor, hands in the pockets of a worn coat, climbed the steps slowly. He stopped a step below Michael, his eyes flicking from the cameras to the young man beside him. You ready for what comes next? The old man asked. Michael turned the question over in his mind. What did come next? He could see it in pieces, sealed files unsealed, whispered rumors shouted from rooftops, 1,000. Small revolutions sparked by one door forced open. He reached into his backpack, pulling the ledger halfway free. This isn't the end, he said. It's a start. The old man nodded, the lines in his face softening like pages turned too many times. You sure you want it? Michael looked down the steps where kids his age balanced phones on the railing, recording every word. Somewhere in that sea of eyes, a new story was already taking shape, bigger than him, heavier than any robe. Yeah, he said finally. I'm sure. His mentor squeezed his shoulder once, not in pride, not in pity, but in passing something forward. A torch that burned brighter than any gavel ever could. The crowd pressed closer. Questions flew like arrows, but Michael stepped. Down one step at a time, moving through them like water through stone. He didn't wave. He didn't pose for the cameras. He didn't need to. The old courthouse behind him shrank with every step, swallowed by sunlight and murmurs of headlines that would never fully capture what happened here today. Halfway down the steps, a young girl tugged at his sleeve. Her hair was tied back with a frayed ribbon, her backpack bigger than she was. Is it true? She asked, voice barely a whisper above the street noise. They can't stop you now? Michael crouched to her level, ignoring the cameras flashing over his shoulder. They can try, he said, but they can't stop you either. Not if. You know where the door is. She smiled, shy, a spark waiting for its fire. Michael stood, the courthouse behind him, the city ahead. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed and car tires hissed on wet asphalt. Life louder than any courtroom. Hushed, he took one last look at the old stone building, the place where a gavel once mocked a boy too young to fight back. Then he turned away, shoulders straight, step sure, and as he vanished into the waiting city, the last thing left behind was a truth bigger than any verdict ever read. A robe can hide a lie. A gavel can bury a voice, but no power can silence the law when the law finally speaks for everyone.